Whoa. I was not expecting that. Welcome to Burnt or Buttered, the quick movie review podcast.
Sometimes quick, sometimes not so quick.
Sometimes it's a 20-minute podcast, and sometimes it's a 20-minute podcast.
So, before you go see your 2-hour-long movie, be sure to watch our 20-minute podcast about that movie.
Save yourself some time. Maybe you don't have to go see a 2-hour movie. Or maybe this 20 minutes will be time well spent where you decide that's the movie for me.
Yeah, exactly. Whether you're listening to this on your way to work or watching it at home before you hit the movie theater. Hopefully.
Or watching a short on Instagram or TikTok while you poop.
Exactly. We hope that you like it.
We're here to make you happy.
Let's pop things off with Love Me.
Love Me. A title that when my friend sent it to me, I thought, that's not going to be the movie for me.
Love Me. A movie that you think is going to be a little bit like Baby Girl.
I was explicitly hoping that it would be nothing like Baby Girl.
So we both went into this one blind, but here's a synopsis for Love Me. It's directed by Sam and Andy. How do you say their name? Zucchero. And this is their first, what would you call it? Feature film.
Yeah.
Directing, and it's a doozy, I think.
Yeah, I mean it is an interesting movie. So Stetson was out of town. My buddy Charlie wanted to go see a movie, and he said, let's go see Baby Girl. And I said, that's the one movie that I just have zero interest in seeing. So let's go see something else. And he said, Love Me. And I said, I do love you, buddy, but I just can't see Baby Girl with you. And he said, no, that's the title. And I said, oh, okay, let's go. And so I went in totally blind as well. And when I walked out of that, I texted Stetson. I said, you need to go see that.
Yep. And so Love Me is a love story, obviously, and it's a pretty interesting love story because it is between a smart buoy and a satellite up in the sky. This is a post-human world, and these two...
Hi.
What would you call them?
Star-crossed lovers.
Star-crossed lovers. But these two objects that are smart thinking objects go through... I guess like an identity crisis. Eventually fall in love through some crazy means. And it's really, to me, the movie's a lot about identity and figuring out what does it mean to say I am or me. Like, what does that actually mean?
What is life?
I don't know if you could tell, but it's date night.
Life is people with a dog eating ice cream.
Earth, once a vibrant cradle for over 1 billion life forms.
It is really interesting. It is a movie for deep thinkers. It's a movie for people that want to experience something that they have never experienced before.
Yeah. My thoughts after leaving the theater are Bowie uses internet to catfish satellite. And that's about the movie, but it's told in an interesting way.
It's pretty true. I mean, that is exactly kind of what happens in this movie. But Kristen Stewart and Steven Yeun are the only actors in this movie, and it is crazy interesting. The timeline is pretty weird. So we'll get into deeper stuff into Behind the Butter, but just so you know, Behind the Butter is where all the spoilers live. Yep. We are going to talk about pretty much every piece of this movie and what we liked and what we didn't like throughout the whole thing. So if you're not looking to have a deep dive into this film, be sure to skip to the final pop, where we're just going to give our rating on what we thought and if you should see it or not without any spoilers. So let's get into Behind the Butter.
Behind the butter. Yeah, so I guess straight from the drop, like the intro scene was incredible. Like that totally set the scene for the movie. You basically watch, what was it, like 5 billion years?
Yeah, you watch the creation of the Earth.
Yeah.
And then the Earth going through all its phases, all the way through humanity, and then past humanity into a frozen icicle of the Earth. And that's where the movie starts. Is kind of the ocean has covered the Earth, and then from the ocean covering the Earth has then frozen over, and this buoy is frozen.
And just right now, you know, what was it? I think the first year was like set in 2050 or 60 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So not the too far distant future,
Mm-hmm.
but man, just that intro with the world being so small and not focusing in on anything specific, you know, but just the movement and the creation and like that gave so much energy to the movie, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, going into it blind, this intro was such an intro that I was like, are we in the right movie?
Are we about
Like-
to watch like David Attenborough or something?
Because, like, just from the poster, you see real human beings, and you see Kristen Stewart and Stephen Young, and you're just like, okay, like it's a love story somehow. It's a love story just from the poster with humans, and you go through this intro, and then all of a sudden it's just this buoy, you know, frozen in a lake, and it's just sitting there. Kind of, the sun shines on it, hits its solar panels, and it wakes up. And then you see this satellite going around the Earth saying, "Welcome to Earth, welcome to Earth." And you're like, what?
Welcome to Earth. Welcome to Earth. Welcome to Earth.
Exactly. And you're just like, what is going on? And, but it pulls you in so much, like from that opening sequence of just the Earth going through its phases to where it is. And what I really, really like about this movie is it shows time in such a beautiful way. Like, and it shows the expansiveness of time in a crazy, crazy way. Like, it goes from the beginning of, you know, the formation of, you know, the Earth just being a tiny little rock and pulling things together to become the Earth, to, you know, the Jurassic period, to the comet hitting the Earth, to it being covered in ash, to then slowly becoming like inhabitable, and then humans come on it, and then it comes to this point. And then just from that time, it really expands on time even more, and it makes it's so interesting to me.
Yeah, like the expanse of time in this movie, I think, is something like 13.6 billion years. Previous love stories, the longest I can think of is 1,000 years of longing, you know? Move over 1,000 years of longing. We're talking 13.6 billion years of longing.
Years. And that's what's so amazing about this movie is you start in like 2025, where this buoy is just doesn't understand anything other than what it's programmed to understand.
Yeah.
And slowly gets introduced, you know, from the satellite, it gets introduced to how to just say welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome to Earth. And it teaches itself how to say welcome just from hearing it over and over and over again, just like a child. And then from there gets introduced to, you know, the internet from the satellite, and teaches itself how to become something.
How to be alive. Like the first thing, you know, the satellite says, "Welcome to Earth," and then she replies, welcome to Earth, and it stops and it says, "Are you a life form?" And you know, it doesn't know how to say anything. I think does it say?
It says life form. Like it just repeats back what it says to it. So like, "Are you a life form?" Life form. And it's like, "Oh, you are a life form."
Yeah.
And then it's like, "What life form are you?" And it's like, "I am a life form." And then it
Buoy?
and then the buoy eventually understands that it's a buoy, and then makes it its whole mission to hide that it's a buoy, to prove that it's a life form to the satellite. And I think the major theme of this movie is them understanding that physically they are something, but intellectually they become something so much more. And that, this buoy goes through this process of understanding that it's buoy, trying to be something that it's not, trying not to be a buoy to the satellite. The satellite, does the same thing for a long period of time. When they get into their room as animated avatars, they are in that room for like a million years.
Yeah, a very long time.
Doing the exact same thing over and over and over and over again until the satellite's like, why do we do this?
Yeah.
And that was
and he also doesn't know the master plan of her trying to make them both this couple that actually existed and was a social media influencer, which, going back to the learning of the buoy, the satellite gives her this video, essentially on YouTube, where David Attenborough is narrating, and he's talking about the Earth and like what went on Earth when there were people and animals and everything. And she gets to the point where there's people, and she just skips. She's like, all right, let's go see the next video. This is boring. And she settles on an influencer. And I think that that's a really interesting... It kind of mirrors the way that a lot of us feel like we're learning, like we don't finish learning about something before we're on to the next topic, like nobody's really doing deep dives on topics anymore. And that leads to a lot of problems down the road for the satellite and the buoy.
Well, I think like a portion of that is when you're a child, who you are is completely formatted based off of somebody else. Who you are and who you think that you are as a being is given to you by your parents. And I think that was a little bit what the story was trying to tell as well, is that like initially you're given your identity. Someone tells you who you are. And the whole...
Speaking as a recent father here.
And the whole movie is them discovering what they are. Eventually, and like the buoy is always trying to hide that it's not a buoy. It's trying to like deceive that it's something different than it truly is. It's trying to prove something. And the satellite kind of comes to terms when he's alone for the
billion years
or however long. He really comes to term with who he is. Like he recognizes, I'm the satellite. This is what I was programmed to do. And he kind of perfects what he was programmed to do. And his last like video, sign off video, is him just being like, this is humanity. If you're watching this, it means absolutely nothing. Here you go.
But at the same time, so they're trying to figure out who they are and everything, and what they end up becoming is something completely different from where they started. They both started out as incongruent objects. A satellite and a buoy could not like be together. They're physically separated, and there's also like the capacity. The buoy has its own AI, but the satellite has the expanse of human knowledge, and they end up both leaving behind what they were to create something new together.
No, exactly. And like the satellite, he, as soon as he lets go of like the construct of like being a satellite, that's when he's able to create.
Yeah.
And as soon as he's able to create, he becomes godlike in the way of I can become anything that I want to become, or I can make anything I want to make, in this world. Like this world is mine, and like I can decide what it is. And going towards the end of the movie, they're hurtling towards the sun. The sun's becoming a red giant, and it's just going to swallow up the earth. And right then at the end is when the buoy finally decides, I'm just going to be who I am. And who I am is not a buoy anymore. And so she is able to let go of the buoy. He's able to let go of the satellite as far as like, this is who we think that we are or who we're supposed to be. And then they create who they actually are.
And not only do they create themselves, but they create an entire world inside there. It's basically like that hard drive is Earth or a new planet.
Exactly. And like they're essentially like an Adam and Eve of this like new Earth, and it begs the question at the end of like, what does it actually mean to be conscious? What does it actually mean to be alive? Because who's to say that this buoy and this satellite, their essence, their spirits, their whatever, are not just as alive in this hard drive as we are alive right now?
Right. I read a few reviews after watching it, and a few people talked about how it felt fake or like fabricated. It didn't feel real to them, and that was their big takeaway. But we're watching two computers essentially become cognizant and make decisions of their own. And I feel like that is going to feel a little bit fake for us who have grown up our entire lives with emotions and feelings. And
and I think like the idea around it too is that, and I think maybe I have like a little bit harsher of a connection to this because I just had a baby and watching my son Ozzy experience things for the first time and seeing like light bulbs go off into his mind and like seeing like little expressions happen and things like that of him. I can't help but think that that's the exact same thing that's happening with these computers. And what I loved about this movie is that it gave so much time for that to happen. It literally gave billions of years for that to turn over. And I think that like that lesson can be translated into our human lives where like our identity takes time. Like it takes a long time, and we have a finite time, here on earth to create like what we think that we are. And one thing that I loved as well is the idea that what you're not. It always knew what wasn't. Like this isn't water. This isn't there. Like I'm not that. I'm not this, I'm not that. And it's the same thing in our human lives, like where we know when something legitimately doesn't feel right for us, as individuals. And that's how we form the I am. That's how we form the me, and that's the name of the characters is me and I am. And I love that too, because they're having conversations with each other and it's all comes down to like, this is one entity. Like they're talking to themselves, at the same time.
Yeah. And it's so interesting too. Like there was that scene where the satellite is saying, I'm not a satellite. And he has to like force himself out of this literal box of thinking, I'm a satellite and that's all I'll ever be. There's a lot of really powerful stuff, as far as metaphors and ideas. Visually, a lot of it was also really, really stunning.
It was amazing. Like, I mean, just to get drawn into this animated world so freaking fast was incredible. Where you're just like, you're looking at this buoy and this buoy exists and you're like, wherever it is, it just exists. And the emotion that was able to be created from a single eye that is just looking, and you can tell that there's longing behind it. You can tell that there's like something behind that mission, and the satellite is almost too smart at the beginning to care. And I loved his self-discovery when she allowed him to like have a post, and she's like, oh, like something, and he's trying to think like, what is funny, like what. And then he's so proud of his post, and she's like, it's okay.
Oh, you don't like my post? Then you don't like me.
Exactly. And that's like such a rudimentary, like elementary thing But that's exactly what children would think.
Yeah.
You know, like you get
Hey,
children.
that's what I think.
Yeah.
You know, when my crush doesn't like my post, she doesn't like me. Time to move on, pal.
But yeah, there's just so much like this movie makes you think forever after the movie. Like I've thought about it ever since I left, and thinking about it more, it just illuminates different things. And one thing that my girlfriend Shelby really connected with was like the dark room that the buoy goes into, of leaving the construct that she created of this apartment that she knows is real into the nothingness that she doesn't know what's past that, to then go and decide like, this is kind of what I am. I'm nothing. You know, like I'm a buoy. I'm not important. I'm nothing. You know, there's nothing that really makes me me, and and that's what it is.
And meanwhile, physically, she was also, you know, deteriorating and sinking. You know,
Yeah.
so it was both like in both ways, mentally and physically, she was in a dark place where she wasn't getting what she needed, you know.
And I am like the satellite being his loss of me was huge, you know, because like everything that he had started to experience and feel was because of me, is because of Bowie. And that loss of him, where he's just like, I guess I have to do this by myself now, you know, like I'm all alone, and he spends thousands and thousands and thousands of years alone, and then she just reappears, and he's just like, you know how long it's been.
But he was also like way chill about it, like,
yeah, I mean, because he was excited to show her everything that like he made, that was better, that was real, you know. He wanted to show her the realness that could be.
Yeah, which another thing that I found interesting was you know, it was kind of a movie about like finding your value in the world, because at the very beginning she realizes, I'm not valuable unless I'm a life form, and that's kind of what kicks this whole thing off. Is he figured out she wasn't a life form, and he's like, okay, see ya, and just started circling the earth again.
That's true. She was always thinking that, oh, he won't care about me unless I have some value as a life form, that I'm real, that I'm a life form.
And then he was going along with her influencer like skits because that's how he thought that he was providing value. His whole thing was, I'm here to help life forms. He thought she was a life form, so he was doing everything he could to help her.
I didn't even see that angle like at the beginning, that's why he was so willing to like be whatever she wanted him to be, because his whole program was to just be what the life form needed.
Right. Yeah. It's not about like, neither one of them were trying to figure out who they were at the time. It was, how can I be valuable to this person? And it was a power struggle, and they weren't cohesive until they both gave up fighting for the power, you know, or deceiving for the power.
Or they both like decided that what was more important was figuring out who I am. Yeah. You know, and what does that actually mean, you know? And him like encouraging the realness, like, and just the idea of like real. Yeah. You know, like I think that was, you know, interesting to see that evolution of him, of just like, I just want something real, you know, and all this feels fake. But to her, it was like, this is real, you know. And
again, I think that's because he had access to all of human knowledge, and she just skimmed the parts that were interesting.
Yeah, she didn't understand water. You know, that's why water wasn't there yet, you know, because like she had no idea what that could be, where he knew that water existed, knew that like people drank it. Well, they were eating food and stuff like that, but food had no taste. It had no.
It wasn't spicy. These are supposed to be spicy quesadillas.
Well, sweet. Well, should we head into the final pop?
Yeah, let's head into the final pop. Into the final pop.
Final pop. You want to go first?
You go for it.
So, I have to give this a freaking 4.9.
Whoa! I was not expecting that.
This movie was one of the best movies I've seen in a very long time. Like, just everything together made it one of the best movies. You know, for me, in the way of visually, it was a stunning. The storytelling was amazing. The time was told almost as good as like Tenet or a movie like that, where you're just looking at time in a completely different way than you never looked at it before, into billions of years, into the idea of like even past the galaxy and like the very, very end. I shouldn't be saying this in the final plot, but the very, very end, looking at the Milky Way and seeing the destruction of our galaxy just being a blip, just being like almost nothing. You know, like in the grand, inconsequential to the grand scheme of what time really is.
Yeah.
And how deeply it made you think, how deeply it made you feel, and just how beautiful it was told. I have to say it was a 4.9. It doesn't get much better than that for me, like coming out of a movie.
Hey, to each their own, you know. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed this one too. I acknowledge I don't think it's going to be the movie for everybody. Like, I don't think this is a movie that is going to do well commercially. It has slow pacing. Like the influencer, like animated sequence took so long, in my opinion.
See, like for me, it had a purpose.
It did. But I'm saying, commercially, I think that these are some of its downfalls as far as a wide audience. For me, I loved it. Like, I thought that it was, and I'm fine with slow, pacing, and I'm fine with having time to think about things. So for me, it was a great film, which is why I told you needed to see it. I can't go quite as high just because there are some shortcomings for me, but overall, I think that it was spectacular. Like, it was such a good, so much was so interesting about it. You know, there are thought, like, you could go watch that and come out with completely new stuff that you noticed or that was important to you. And so for me, it's definitely above average. But I can't go 4.9. Like, that's crazy.
You've given movies 4.9s before that were way worse than this movie.
Hey, to each their own. But I'm gonna go with a 4 on this one.
A 4.
Yeah.
I think that no matter who sees this movie, whether they will come out of the movie experiencing something that they will be happy that they experienced. Even if they're like, that wasn't the greatest movie I've ever seen, they will leave the theater with something that was good. And to me, like, it was amazing. That's why I have to give it a 4.9. I think anybody that sees this film, if they go into it with like some sort of openness, they will really, really enjoy it. And if you don't, then you're just wrong. I'm sorry.
I mean, you can't think this is going to be a slam dunk like a Den of
I feel like it had. This movie has to win awards to me. Like,
I was thinking the same thing.
With a 2-person cast.
Yeah.
A 2-person cast. There's no other actors in this entire film.
It took 2 directors, though.
Yeah, a husband and wife.
No, yeah, I think it was beautiful. It was remarkable. It's like you said, it's unlike anything that I've seen probably ever.
It's in a world that we live in now that is just remakes on remakes on remakes and sequels that don't need to happen.
and then some things that are just megalopolis.
It's just insane. Something original like this that has not come from A24 is unheard of.
Yeah.
Like, it's so good.
Yep.
And original, and I'm excited to see what these guys bring to us next as a feature film. But.
Yeah. No, I thought it was great. I can't go 4.9 though.
This is as buttery as it gets for me. This is perfect.
Yeah.
Almost. Not a 5. I don't even know what a 5 is, honestly. Like, Jojo Rabbit is right up there with this movie to me.
JoJo's good, but this one's really good. I just it's not for everyone, I think. So if you're not ready for slow pacing and you're not interested in introspection and metaphors about your own life, then it may not be the movie for you.
And what's interesting about it is that the slow pacing comes with a runtime of an hour and 32 minutes.
Right.
You know, so it's not a long movie.
Yeah. We're not talking Brutalist. We're not talking 3.5 hours. You know,
Yeah.
This is a high return on investment as far as time.
If you don't watch this when it comes out on streaming, you're just dumb. You should see it in theaters. I want to go see it again today. It just is one of those movies that you just want to see again. You know, I definitely will watch it again for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good.
All right. Well, we'll see you in the next one.
Pop, pop.